We've all seen art that stops us in our tracks, makes us look closer. But then there's that other kind of art, the kind that makes you pause, maybe squint a little, and maybe even think, my kid could probably do that. And you hear that reaction so often when people first encounter the raw, sometimes really jarring canvases of Willem de Kooning. We're talking about work that was so audacious, so seemingly chaotic, that it basically threw down the gauntlet to every established idea of beauty at the time. But here's a thought. What if these paintings, the ones some critics back then literally called useless, maybe even ugly, what if they actually hold some kind of profound secret? Like a key that could unlock not just a deeper way of looking at art, but maybe understanding beauty itself, complexity, maybe even the core of human experience. So that's really our mission for this deep dive. We're going right into the world of Willem de Kooning. We want to try and unravel some of the dense layers in his abstract expressionist work, figure out why that apparent chaos still feels so relevant today. Get ready, because this might genuinely stretch, maybe even reshape how you think about what makes a masterpiece. Okay, so for anyone who's, familiar with those big shifts in art after the war, abstract expressionism probably doesn't need a big introduction. But today, we're not just going to define it. We really want to explore how de Kooning took its main ideas, that raw emotional punch, the relentless spontaneity, putting the process first, and push them somewhere truly radical. So yeah, to really get his unique contribution, I think we have to quickly revisit how this whole kind of turbulent movement emerged.
Precisely. And it's easy to talk about abstract expressionism like it was just one single style. But really, it was this vibrant mix, often pretty contentious actually, of artists. They were fundamentally rebelling against the art rules of the people who came before them. Think of it less as a style guide and more like a shared ethos. It popped up in mid-20th century America, fueled by all that post-war anxiety and this deep need for personal expression. What really set it apart was how boldly it embraced the canvas itself as like an arena for a really visceral experience. So instead of painting a landscape or a portrait you'd recognize, these artists were having this direct, almost confrontational conversation with their paint, their canvas. The art wasn't about showing something out there, it was about getting something internal out of the canvas, which meant, first, this huge focus on emotional expression, getting deep feelings and psychological states out there directly. Then you had spontaneity, making the actual act of painting into a kind of performance, where the artist's gesture, their movement was key, and crucially, it often felt like it was process over product. The journey, the struggle, just the physical effort of making the thing was often seen as more important than the finished piece. It sort of invites you, the viewer, into the raw feeling of how it was made.
Yeah, that focus on the raw, unfiltered experience really does set it apart. And de Kooning, he wasn't working alone, right? He was part of this really dynamic scene, a community where pretty much everyone was pushing boundaries, but he still somehow managed to carve out his own distinct space.
Absolutely. I mean, within this revolutionary movement, you had giants like Jackson Pollock, right? Famous for his drip paintings, exploring chance and control, basically turning the canvas into a record of his own physical movements. And then someone totally different like Mark Rothko, who was searching for this kind of transcendental feeling through these huge glowing fields of color. De Kooning, well, he shared that abstract expressionist drive for deep emotion and spontaneous gestures, but he took a strikingly different route. He never totally let go of the figure, even when he was pushing abstraction right to its limits.
Which kind of begs the question, doesn't it? How did he manage to be so radically different in a movement that was already defined by being radical? And his Women series, that really became his defining and, most controversial answer to that. Right, the Woman series. And that's where things get really, really interesting. Launched in the early 50s, this series isn't just famous, it feels like a declaration of war on traditional pretty pictures. These paintings are definitely not easy to look at sometimes, which is probably exactly why they're still so powerful.
You absolutely nailed it. These works, they're defined by this almost violent, really aggressive brushwork. The figures aren't just stylized. They're often grotesquely distorted, maybe with these glaring eyes or kind of predatory smiles. De Kooning was pushing the absolute boundaries of how women, how feminine, how beauty itself had been shown in art history. I mean, think about the whole lineage of the female nude, Botticelli's Venus Ingersollesques, typically idealized, calm, beautiful objects for, the male gaze. De Kooning just shattered that convention with explosive force. The shock, when the Woman series first appeared, it came from that sheer raw energy, that unflinching psychological depth. These weren't your typical idealized muses. These were figures with immense, often really unsettling power. They felt aggressive, confrontational. And for many viewers at the time, genuinely disturbing. And this wasn't just about changing artistic style. It was a deep social and cultural challenge. It forced people to reckon with these deeply embedded ideas about beauty, about femininity, about what art is even supposed to show. It was really an assault on expectation.
Okay, let's focus in on Woman I. That's from 1952, probably the most famous, maybe infamous of the whole series. Can you describe what we're actually seeing there? And maybe more importantly, what is de Kooning doing with that painting?
Right, Woman with Me, it's such a masterpiece of tension, a paradox, really. The figure is huge, almost overwhelming the canvas. She stares right out at you with this big kind of unsettling grin and these wide eyes that look almost terrified. And get this, de Kooning apparently worked on this single canvas for about 2 years. Painting, repainting, scraping layers down, building them back up again. It's a perfect example of that process over product idea we talked about. He applied the paint with this incredible, furious energy. You can almost see the slashes, the smears, the drips. It shows the sheer physical effort involved. The colors are incredibly vibrant, almost clashing sometimes, applied with these dynamic, really frenetic brushstrokes that just scream raw, untamed energy. So the figure ends up being both, well, grotesque and somehow utterly captivating at the same time. It's this complex mix of attraction and repulsion. It's not really one woman you can easily define. It feels more like this mashup of images, stuff from ads, pinup girls, maybe even ancient fertility statues, all churned through his own turbulent mind. And what people sometimes miss is that tension, right?
Between that maybe seductive gaze and the violently painted form. It directly attacks our expectation of just passively looking at a beautiful woman. It forces you into this confrontation with uncomfortable truths about how society sees femininity. It turns the act of looking into something visceral almost. Confrontational.
That's a really vivid description. But, some of de Kooning's critics, even other artists at the time, they found the Woman series deeply problematic. Some even called it misogynistic. How do we square that reaction with this idea that he was actually deepening our understanding of femininity?
That's such a crucial point. It is absolutely vital we acknowledge that initial, often hostile reception. You're right. Many people did see the aggressive distortion as an attack, as a brutal way of depicting the female form, no question. However, if you look at what de Kooning himself said and the broader context of abstract expressionism, his goal wasn't necessarily to insult or degrade women. It seems more like he was grappling with the sheer complexity of woman as both this idealized muse and sometimes a terrifying, almost monstrous figure, a really powerful presence in his own life and in society generally. He actually said once something like beauty becomes an agony. Yeah. So what he achieved, I think, through that deliberate distortion and that raw emotional intensity was this profound dialogue. A dialogue about the very nature of femininity, of beauty, and, the often uncomfortable truths of just being human. He wasn't just painting a woman. He was exploring all these internal and external forces, perception, desire, anxiety that shape how we see things. He really challenged viewers to look past conventional prettiness, to confront something more raw, more multifaceted, and ultimately more deeply human. His work kind of forces us to ask, what happens when the object of beauty seems to fight back? When that idealized image gets stripped away to show something more primal, maybe less comfortable, and that refusal to just make something nice and easy. That's precisely what makes the series still feel so important, so significant today.
Wow, so his approach wasn't just a ripple effect, it was more like a tidal wave. And it's still shaping the art world today. It's clear his impact goes way beyond just his own paintings.
Oh, absolutely. De Kooning's influence isn't just some dusty chapter in an art history book. It's really a living force. It genuinely paved the way for so many later movements and a whole range of contemporary artists. Think about his emphasis on the process, that raw spontaneity, the performance aspect of painting. It directly points towards early performance art. Artists like, say, Carolee Schneemann, whose work was often provocative, body-based, blurring those lines between making art, the artist's body, and lived experience. They definitely owe a debt to his focus on the act of creation over just the finished object. And you can absolutely trace his impact forward into neo-expressionism in the 70s and 80s. Artists like Julian Schnabel or Jean-Michel Basquiat, they embraced that emotional intensity, that raw, often aggressive gestural style. And they brought back figuration in a way de Kooning had pioneered, though obviously in their own unique ways. Their work has that same kind of visceral punch, that powerful psychological charge. And, even today in digital art, contemporary artists are still drawing on his ideas about spontaneity and emotional expression. They're just using new tools, technology to explore dimensions of creativity that de Kooning back then could only really gesture at with paint and canvas. Think about things like glitch art or digital drawing that tries to capture the raw energy of a brushstroke. That spirit of just experimenting is still very much alive.
That's incredible. To think that so much of today's visual culture, even the digital stuff, owes something to those furious strokes he made back then. His work really does feel like more than just art history. It feels current.
Totally. And its ongoing relevance is clear from all the critical reevaluations the major museum shows that keep happening all over the world. Galleries, scholars, they're always revisiting de Kooning, finding new ways to understand his complicated relationship with representing things, with abstraction, with the human form. His spirit of just trying things, his fearless approach to painting, it remains this potent example for artists today who are wrestling with similar questions about identity, emotion, social pressures.
Yeah.
It kind of set a standard for art being an experience that challenges you, maybe transforms you, not just something that decorates a wall.
Which brings us right back to where we started, doesn't it? That whole dismissive idea of useless art. After digging into de Kooning's world and this revolutionary abstract expressionist way of thinking and his really confrontational woman series, how do we maybe redefine that idea now that art like this is somehow useless?
Yeah, looking back at it now, that perceived uselessness, you can actually reframe it as maybe art's most critical job, to provoke, to challenge, and ultimately to expand how we see the world. De Kooning's work, it just isn't about fitting into traditional, easy-to-swallow ideas of beauty. It's about digging into the profound, often really uncomfortable parts of being human, the raw emotions that define us. His canvases, they weren't made to be pretty. They were made to be felt. They sort of force us to look beyond just the surface, beyond what we expect art to look like, and to discover the surprising power and depth that abstract expressionism, when it's at its most fearless, can actually hold. Art, and especially abstract art like de Kooning's, it acts like a powerful mirror sometimes. It reflects the complexities, the contradictions, often the discomforts of just existing as humans right back at us. It invites us, maybe pushes us, to confront our own biases, to question the norms we just accept, and to connect with our emotions on a deeper, more visceral level. De Kooning's canvases, with all their apparent chaos, they aren't meant to be just passively glanced at. They demand that you interact, that you interpret, and often, that you recalibrate your own ideas about what looks good. They push us to think, to feel, and to really grasp that art doesn't always have to be conventionally beautiful to be profoundly meaningful, maybe even essential.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe the challenge for you, listening, is to reconsider your own relationship with abstract art. Instead of maybe approaching it with that immediate judgment or confusion, try to see it as an opening. An opportunity for dialogue, for discovery, a chance to push your own boundaries a little. So here's the challenge. Next time you're in a museum or a gallery, maybe make a point of seeking out the abstract stuff. Take a real moment with a de Kooning or a Pollock or a Rothko if you see one, and try not to ask, what is it? But maybe ask, what is it doing? What's it making me feel? Just allow yourself to experience whatever emotions or thoughts come up as you stand in front of these sometimes uncomfortable, often definitely unpretty works.
Yeah, and you might just find that these works hold a kind of key. Not just to understanding how art changed, but maybe to understanding the beauty of human experience itself in all its messy, complicated, contradictory glory. In the end, de Kooning's art really challenges us, doesn't it, to redefine what we think beauty is, what complexity means, what gives something meaning. So maybe embrace the chaos a little. Question your own expectations. You might just uncover some profound truths hidden inside those furious brushstrokes.